Get ready to welcome everybody. Webinar is now live and it is recording. All right. So we've got 17 folks on. I'm just going to give it a minute too. It takes a while for everybody to log in. Hi, Becky Millspa. Hi, everyone. We will get started in about a minute or two. Seeing all my friends show up. Don Keene, Kelly, Tyler. There's Catherine. Hey, Catherine.
Hey there.
Okay, I'm going to get us started, Kelsey, because I was told outside of our that we had a total of 44 people registered for today, so we're at about 43. So I'm just going to get started. You good with that?
Sounds great.
Welcome everybody to our second installment of our district coaches leadership project. When we last were together, we introduced this project and we introduced you to the District Systems Fidelity Inventory, and Kelsey Morris, along with Kelly Perales, are supporting our state through this process. We have identified certain districts who are going to actually do the project and go through this form, go through the different components of the District Systems Fidelity Inventory. And all of you who are fishbowling this, our hope is you will follow along, watch the videos, use the materials, and to start to utilize this out in the field as well, and give us feedback on that. So Kelsey's going to get started on the program for today, working with our teams. And then at the end, I will be putting in for everybody it's an evaluation form, right, Kelly, for the National Center, because we are getting this TA support from our partners. And then I will stay on with all of the panelists to talk about the stipend that was, I emailed you the information about if you had any questions about that. It's fortuitous that today's topic is stakeholder engagement and funding and alignment. So at that, I'm going to turn it over to Kelsey and Kelly.
Okay. Go ahead and share my screen for today. Let's do. Okay, let's double check real quick. Are you able to see the slides that I'm sharing? Fantastic. Okay, well, welcome everybody. I am Kelsey Morris, as Tina so nicely introduced me, and she gave a great hint into what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be picking back up with the District Systems Fidelity Inventory, or you'll hear me talk a lot about it being the DSFI. We're going to talk today specifically about our next two sections, Section 2, Stakeholder Engagement, and Section 3, Funding and Alignment. So if you weren't with us at our previous session back in December, just a quick introduction for myself. I'm Kelsey Morris. I'm the co-director of the Center for School-Wide PBIS at the University of Missouri. I'm an implementation partner with the National Center on PBIS. And one of the co-authors for the District Systems Fidelity Inventory. And a lot of the work that we do here at the University of Missouri is all about district-wide implementation. So I've got the luxury of being a technical assistance provider with several of our districts kind of here in the Midwest to work on district-wide implementation. So I'm excited to be here with you all today. And so I loved how Tina described it, kind of our next installment. It always makes me think of TV shows when they say previously on. So previously on the DSFI, we talked about leadership teaming. So what we're going to do today is activate some learning. I always think it's helpful for us to kind of check back in, review our purpose around doing this work. We'll just kind of briefly review leadership teaming, And I do want to check in with you on the takeaway tasks that we had in December. There was just a little bit of homework that you were going to take back to your districts and see kind of what happens if, and kind of, I wonder what could become. So we'll check in on those things. In terms of today, we're going to be spotlighting some new drivers, specifically stakeholder engagement and funding and alignment. And throughout our time together today, I want to be sure that I share content, I share resources and next steps with you that can really help you and guide your district on this journey of district-wide implementation and kind of expanding and scaling PBIS. So that's where we're headed today. So let's start with activating our learning, kind of checking in on where we were in December. So what we talked about in December was, yes, we have the DSFI, and this is a fidelity measure that a district leadership team would take to kind of see where are we in terms of implementation. And the way that we structured the DSFI was in alignment with the 9 implementation drivers that you see on that graphic organizer on the left. You know, we talked last time about leadership teaming because that's the critical element. We can't do the executive functions at the top row in blue or the implementation functions at the bottom, kind of middle bottom row there in green without having a leadership team to coordinate everything. And like I mentioned today, we're going to be moving into stakeholder engagement as well as funding and alignment, which were some of those executive level functions. We also talked last time we met that our ultimate goal is that we're building capacity. We want the capacity to sustain this work, not just at an individual building, but really at all buildings and all campuses to support all of our students within the district. And that we're working to create a continuum of support for all students. So we're talking about tiers 1, 2, and 3 and trying to figure out what do we do? And when we get into funding and alignment today, we'll start to talk about some things related to those advanced tiers, tier 2 and 3, and how important it is that the district take a leadership role in identifying interventions that are at play for students that need additional supports beyond tier 1. We also talked that these circles are really familiar to us. We know these from just doing school-wide PBIS and thinking about if we want students to achieve social competence and academic achievement at high rates, then it comes from systems, practices, and data. But the new part that we added last time we met was that when we think of systems, we want to align resources and start to rethink what is expertise. How can we create systems that really work across campuses, across initiatives, across programs? So when we get into section 3 today about funding and alignment, that's going to be a major theme. How do we align to create sustainable systems? We talked last time about data and how data helps with decision making. We're familiar at a building level using student level data for that campus. But as we grow this up to a district perspective, we're looking at data from all schools to figure out how can we differentiate training, coaching, or just making sure that schools are getting the resources that they need to implement with fidelity. And in terms of practices to support student behavior, the district's really taking a good look at what are we doing across all tiers to make sure that people have what they need. Now, all of that comes from this district leadership team that we talked about in January. And this is January, talked about in December. And we went through the section on leadership teaming. There were 9 specific items that we talked about. We kind of broke them down into categories of composition. How do you just kind of compose your leadership team and what you need to pay attention to as you do that, as well as the characteristics of how the team operates and why they exist. And then once that team starts doing work, there's communication loops that need to be established. So that way people are aware of the work being done and the team gets feedback from stakeholders and other perspectives. I left you last time with a DSFI administration guidance document that helped you start to think about, okay, these are the roles that really need to be represented on the team. And so we kind of broke those down A through G, giving you good content to take back and start to think about. If I was going to draft a roster, thinking about my district, thinking about how my district is organized, who might be on my team, who might wear one of these hats, A through G, or even multiple hats. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I got this idea from one of the students that is in my classroom management class. Everybody's teaching online and figuring out new ways to do stuff. So we're going to do a chat blast. So when I count to 5, I want you in the chat to post your district's name, because we've got our Trailblazer districts represented today, those districts that are saying, okay, we're going to figure out district-wide implementation. But when I count to 5, I want you to send through the chat your district's name and also one possible person and say their role. Maybe it's the coordinator for student services or the coordinator for social workers or whatever. But I want you to send through the chat one person that you've identified as a good candidate for your team. So on 5, you're going to say your name, district's name, and one possible person. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Lisa from Blairsville, Salzburg. Oh, Christy, North Penn. Betty's going to be a good one for you. I see Director of Student Services. That'd be a great one for your team. Anyone else? Okay, so you weren't supposed to form a team in a month. That would be shocking if you did so. Superintendent for Erie, that's great. We definitely want executive level leaders. Director of Elementary Ed, great. Curriculum Director, these are all fantastic ideas. These are all people, Director of Special Education, absolutely. These are people that we would want to be around the table when we're thinking about how do we form a district leadership team that is going to help us expand and scale. Parents, yes, we're going to be talking about stakeholders today. Ken, but I think is Ken, I can't remember. Somebody logged in as Ken, but I think their name's actually Jill. So I don't want to call somebody by the wrong name. And if I do, I apologize in advance. Now, what we're going to be doing with this moving forward, you've started to draft who could be on my team. Continue to work that. If I remember correctly, we want to have you start your first team meeting in June, kind of shoot for June of 2021. You've got a roster, you've brought people together, and you're trying to move this work forward. So don't feel that you've got to leave today's session and go and have a fully formed team, because what we talked about last time was it's going to ebb and flow. As you move from exploration to installation, you may add some members. So you may identify, wow, okay, we thought this role would be best represented on the team, but I don't really know that it's that role so much as this one over here. So your team membership may be in flux during these initial phases, and that's way okay. So moving from leadership teaming into stakeholder engagement, and before we do that, I always want to acknowledge and demonstrate appreciation. Thanks so much for engaging in that chat class. It's a good way for us to check in with each other. If I leave you with homework or takeaway tasks, I want you to feel like those were meaningful. Those were actually important. And one of the ways that we do that is when we circle back for our next time together, we check in on those and see kind of what happened. So thanks for participating. I appreciate that greatly. Today's topics are stakeholder engagement. This strand, or you might call it a domain in the DSFI, is shorter in comparison to others. It's really just 3 items. We're talking about stakeholder involvement, information dissemination, and stakeholder participation. And so what we did last time, and just to kind of remind ourselves, what I'm going to do is present to you the DSFI number and feature name. So we'll kind of talk through what is the feature, what are the possible data sources, the scoring criteria, all information that you want to think about, because it's ultimately going to inform your work. It's going to inform an action plan that gets created by your district leadership team to move this work forward. Now, once we present kind of the nuts and bolts of the item, I'm going to boil it down for you and give you a main idea. And we've been working really hard here at the University of Missouri, our team, to create main idea statements and essence statements for each of the DSFI items. Because what we know is if we make it practical for people, if we remove the jargon or the educator ease and give people the tools they need to do good work, we can do good work. So I want to be sure to leave you with a main idea or an essence statement to explain the feature, so that way you've got kind of that one sentence takeaway that you can do good work with. We'll also present quick checks. So if you were doing the DSFI with a team, you would want to have some conversation to reach a consensus score. So we'll give you the quick checks for that. Now, some of the items that we go through today, some of the slides, you may see a red push pin in the top right corner. That's noteworthy information to hold on to. I wish we had more time together in a single session, but logistically, it just doesn't make sense. We can do some really good work in an hour and a half. We could spend a whole day on stakeholder engagement alone, even though it's just 3 items. We could do a deep dive and talk about a lot of different things. Same with funding and alignment, or really any section of the DSFI. So if I put a red push pin on a slide, that means I'm going to touch on it really briefly, but we're not going to do a deep dive on it. I just kind of want to make sure that I plant that seed or kind of put that out there because it helps frame our thinking for the content today. But like I said, we could do a whole session on just anything that has a red push pin on it. Now, if you see something that has a checklist clipboard, what I tried to think about when I crafted our takeaway tasks or your homework for the interim between this meeting and next is, how could I help you know what content to come back to be as successful as possible, kind of work as effectively and efficiently as you could. So anything that has that clipboard on it, that's going to be helpful for your homework and next steps. So I tried to give you some icons to help you focus in the time that we weren't together. All right. And then every time we touch on a chunk, I've tried really hard to section things into bite-sized pieces. And before we move from one part to the next, we'll always have a content checkpoint. That's your time to interact with me. I always want people to feel like it's okay when we get to these checkpoints to unmute yourself, to ask clarifying questions, to seek clarification. I really want to make sure that if something feels a little fuzzy, we work to make it clear before we move on to something else. So with that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at stakeholder engagement. So one of the things I want you to kind of put a pin and hold on to is that when we talk about stakeholder engagement, we have to understand there are different groups of stakeholders. We've got community partners. So we want to think about people who also care about this issue. Maybe it's a community agency that's doing this work that we want to connect with somehow, some way, so that way it's not siloed work and we're actually using resources effectively and efficiently. We want to think about what work is already being done underway, or how can we work in a partnership way to deepen our connections. A lot of this stuff about community partnerships comes from interconnected systems framework. And so I will leave with Tina a lot of resources that you can use on demand after the fact to continue to do good learning about stakeholder groups. We've also got business partners. So our students, our faculty, just anybody that's within the zone of the districts going to all of these businesses. Those are a great way to conceptualize stakeholders. So when we think about businesses that we would frequent most often, what do we want them to know, or what do we want them to feel, or how could we encourage them to show support for the work that's being done? The example that I give sometimes is, I know of a district here within Missouri that they took the expectations for the district, safe, respectful, responsible, and the town bank put it on the scrolling marquee out front along with the time and the temperature. So that way it was working to create that community approach from a business partner perspective to district-wide implementation. We've also got our families, and this is the one that we oftentimes most think of when we talk about stakeholders, because these are the families that we're connecting with the most. We want to make sure that they've got the right information at the right times, so that way they really don't get to that place of developing false assumptions or false perspectives about what's happening. We want to make sure that they're informed so that way they can be successful from the parent and family perspective in the education of their child. And we've also got student groups. These are the students that are the direct recipients of what we're doing, and they can create and generate helpful ideas and be promoters and supporters of the work that's being done. So each of these has a red push pin in it. We could talk all day long about any of these stakeholder groups, but I really want you, for your work, when you go back to your soon-to-be district team or others in your district, to think about when we do work with stakeholder engagement, we have 4 different groups that we're trying to support for the scalability of PBIS. So that leads us into stakeholder involvement, which is feature 2.1. So with this, we're wanting as a district leadership team to have a written process, something documented, something tangible, something established that outlines how we actively involve our stakeholders. Maybe those are the school boards or the families, community organizations. You see on there, it also says leaders, politicians, youth. We've got different people that we're seeking involvement, engagement, and perspective from, not just pushing information out, but also pulling information back in, because we want to involve these individuals in goal setting and policy development. And so the main idea of this item is that the stakeholders that we have in our zone, in our district, well, their daily lives are impacted by what we do in the district, our policies and our goals. So we want to work to develop collaborative processes to meaningfully engage them. So with that being the main idea of stakeholder involvement, a team quick check might be, do you have a stakeholder engagement plan? Is that something that's been outlined already in terms of who our stakeholder groups are, the type of information that we send out, and the frequency that we send it out? You might look at that plan and think about, does it include steps for implementing or revising decisions based upon their perspective? Is the stakeholder engagement plan purely just information dissemination, or is it also soliciting feedback on the work that's being done across the district related to school climate, social, emotional, behavioral initiatives and programs? Because what we're trying to get at is, do we demonstrate collaborative decision? And so you can see that in order for this item to be fully implemented, we would want to have that written process to engage our stakeholders, and that it be representative of the district's demographics and any underserved populations. So here's an example of a stakeholder engagement plan for a district. You can see, and this will be something that I share with Tina as a resource for you. We've developed it in Google, so it can be a Google Force copy into your Google Drive account. But you can see there's a column for the objective, the stakeholder engagement goal, what are the specific action steps we want to take, status, persons responsible, and then you can see there's a column for the target audience. Is it an internal stakeholder group? And if so, who? Is it an external stakeholder group? And if so, who? And then what type of information are we pushing out? Or what are we disseminating? Is it information, data, accomplishments, and what's the timeline and the methods? So this is a really structured way to step back and go, okay, this is an important thing for us to do. We want to make sure that people get the right information at the right time and that it is being sent to all of our stakeholders. That's a big lift. So something like this can help organize that work. So from stakeholder involvement to information dissemination, kind of continuing that thread there. With information dissemination, the district is identifying one or more tools for communicating information, data, and accomplishments. And that can be things like having a district website all about PBIS, having a district newsletter about PBIS, going to school board presentations, and presenting about the work that's being done. There's lots of different ways that this could take shape. So the main idea is that when we have that information, data, and accomplishments being communicated clearly and consistently, and the key here is through a variety of dissemination methods, we're ensuring equitable access among stakeholder groups. And we want to highlight equitable access because not everybody's going to have access to a computer or internet to access a district website about PBIS. For some of our families where housing is an insecurity for them, we don't want to rely on mailers because not everybody has the chance to receive mail. So trying to think about what are the different ways, the different methods that we could use to communicate so that way we do get that equitable access and we're communicating the information about what is PBIS or what is tier 2 or a specific intervention. We're also communicating data for celebrations and just general accomplishments. And so here's a quick check of how a team might kind of self-assess and make sure that they've got the nuts and bolts for this. Thinking through what are our systems? Are those systems documented and formalized? Or are we kind of just relying on somebody because they've always done it this way? And then how often is it being shared? Because we're hoping that in order to be fully implemented, we have multiple systems established, formalized, to share information, data, and accomplishments, the big 3, at least annually. So one of the resources we have for you is just a kind of a graphic organizer. We think about things that are in print. We think about things that are electronic, and we think about things that are verbal. There's lots of different methods, avenues, or events that we could use to share print, electronic, and verbal. And it's all about aiding stakeholder engagement. And so I've given you that acronym there, AID, AID, because it's an easy way to think about we want to share accomplishments, we want to share information, and we want to share data. So from stakeholder dissemination, kind of information dissemination, and 2.1, stakeholder involvement, these are big things that I'm going to ask you to think about for next time. Between now and when we come back at the end of February, consider what are our current stakeholder engagement processes? What are we currently doing? What are we currently sharing? Is it only information or is it all of the big 3? With what frequency? So kind of take stock of what's being done now and start to brainstorm maybe 1 or 2 recommendations that could move you to the next level, maybe from good to great. And I think all of these takeaways that are of a reflective nature can really become good content for when your team has their first meeting. So the last one that we'll talk about, and then we'll do a quick checkpoint together, is stakeholder participation. So we started with 2.1 identifying, yes, we have stakeholders. We want them to be a part of the process, not only to receive information, but to participate in goal setting and policy development and share information. We moved into 2.2 where we talked about it's important for us to take the responsibility to get information out in a timely manner, multiple ways so that way everybody can get it. 2.3 is the district taking responsibility and saying, we've got to participate with our stakeholders. We want to make sure that our district leaders are actively and visibly participating in PBIS events, because we don't just want to talk the talk, we want to walk the walk. So maybe that's going to an annual event like the PBIS Leadership Forum that happens every year in Chicago, or another PBIS conference at a state or national level, or even a local level. Visiting implementation sites to demonstrate that this is important, this is valued, and to celebrate the work that's being done by acknowledging progress. And when they're participating, showing up, and engaging at the event, they're engaging stakeholders. They're talking to the stakeholders about their experiences related to implementation. You know, if I go to a school event, I want to talk to the parents about how they see PBIS at play in their child's development and growth. So engaging stakeholders in that way. the main idea is that when we have our district leaders actively participating in the events, they are endorsing the daily work of implementation. They're visibly affirming the district's goals for PBIS, and they're creating the opportunity to receive feedback from the stakeholders about how implementation is going, how our outcomes are being realized. It creates conversation. So with that being the main idea, the quick check that a team could use is just to think about our district level leaders, Board of Education members. If we have an event at a building, or if we're doing something for PBIS in our district, maybe it's a parent orientation night or a kickoff, back to school, whatever, are we inviting these people there? We got to make sure that we're inviting people to the event so that way they can engage at the event. Also thinking for our Board of Education members, as the district leadership team, how are we making sure that they know what PBIS is, what our action plan is? How are we sharing information, data, and accomplishments with our Board of Education members? Because when they leave that Board of Education meeting, they go back to being community members. So we want to make sure that we're keeping them informed. And then when we go to events, do the leaders publicly promote? Are they engaging? Are they actively participating in the event? So that's the quick check that a team could use to kind of self-assess to what degree do we have this in place. So that brings us to a good content checkpoint. We've actually covered section 2, stakeholder engagement, just those 3 quick items. Let's open up the lines and see what questions might you have about this strand or any one of these items in particular.
So as panelists, as part of the group that's the target districts, you can unmute yourself and ask Kelsey a question directly. For everybody out in TV land, you can put your question in the Q&A box. I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A, and it doesn't sound like our panelists have any questions. You were just so thorough on that stakeholder part.
Hey, I'll take it. I'll take it. I don't see anything coming through in the chat, and that's way okay. I'm also respectful of the fact that that was new information. And so it may take you a minute to kind of marinate on something, go, I should have a question about that. When that happens, when we get to the next content checkpoint, feel free to post that question, and I'm more than happy to talk about it. The goal today is that you've got tools in your toolbox to do good work when you go back to your districts. So that being said, let's take a look at funding and alignment, which is section 3 of the DSFI. So with funding and alignment, we're talking about 8 different items, from a budget plan, so there's that funding coming into play, to how do we align the work that's being done? Because we want to be more efficient. We want the quality to go up, and we want our cost, and not just a financial cost, you know, the time that we invest, how we use our resources, how we position our people. We want kind of those indirect costs to go down too. And then how do we make sure that we're keeping our fingers on the pulse of what's going on? And so that's where you see some of these things about alignment review and making sure that we have options and operations identified, because we want to make sure that this is sustainable beyond just the first year, and that we're really taking a big picture view, because there's a lot of work that happens within a district. And so we don't want this work with PBIS or social emotional behavioral health to be siloed, seen as separate. We really want it to be integrated. So let's take a look and pick up with 3.1. So with 3.1, we're talking about a budget plan. We know that anything worth doing is likely going to take some financing. So we want to have a budget plan in place with prioritized funding. And what we mean by prioritized funding, it could be a line item, it could be a special account, We want people to know that there are dollars and cents attached to this work. I work with a district right now where the PBIS team, they're never worried about being able to do something. They know they can always go to their executive level leaders, present their case, present their rationale, talk about how it maps back to the district's goals and how the work is aligned. And they know they're always going to get the financing to do whatever they need to do. That's just how their district operates. However, that district doesn't have a dedicated funding source for PBIS. They don't have a dedicated line item. It's oftentimes the superintendent going, I believe in this work, we'll find the money. And that's a great thing. But we'll find the money isn't sustainable. And so we want to really work to make sure that we've got a budget plan with prioritized funding, so that way we can support those operating structures, continued capacity building activities, and really make sure that we're building something sustainable and solid. And so that main idea is just that. We have allotted internal long-term funds. And so I want to draw your attention to internal. Lots of times when districts do this work, it's because they've received a grant or some form of financial assistance from, say, a state PBS network or the State Department of Ed in relation to something that is an initiative at the state level. There's an external funding stream that's come in to facilitate this work. That external funding stream will close at some point in time. So we want to start to pivot and say, how do we get and how do we pay attention to things that are internal, things that are sustainable and renewable? And we've got it written down, documented, established somewhere, so that way people know, okay, we do have dollars and cents that are going to this important thing. So the quick check for that could be to take a look and see, what is your primary funding source? Is it an external grant? Is it internal funding? Really just at that kind of that basic level of knowing, listing, identifying, where is the money coming from to support this work? And then from that, thinking, does the district have a line item to help with the operational costs that go along with scaling and expanding? Because in order to be fully implemented, we'd be looking for a district to have transitioned from that short-term funding to something that is long-term funding. So one of the resources that we've developed and that I'll make sure that you have access to, and is an example district leadership team PBIS budget. So you can see here, it's a Google spreadsheet, but there's a column for the description of what is being funded. There is a Board of Education goal that it gets mapped back to, so that way people understand what we're doing is in alignment with what the district is envisioning for success. There's also some detailed information about what that specific item is. There are columns for applicable tiers, and then you can see the dollars and cents that go along with that. So it's a way to have a good read as a district leadership team in terms of how much is it going to cost us to implement PBIS? What are the things that we need to pay attention to? And what are the things that we need to make sure we advocate for, so that way we do have recurring funding streams? So one of the things that I want you to consider for next time, or I would encourage you to consider for next time, is this item. Identify your current funding source. Where is the money coming from? Is it an external grant? And if so, great, that's fantastic. Understand what are the details of that grant. How many years will you have that funding source? If you have transitioned from external to internal, are you a really solid internal where there's a line item or a specific budget note? Is it very clear when somebody looks at the budget that that money goes to this work? Or is it more like the case of the district that I support, where they're incredibly supportive of the work and they'll always find the money, but it's not specifically allocated? So I encourage you to take a look at that between now and when we come back in February, because it's going to continue to inform your work and move your work in your district, your team forward. So from budget and dollars and cents to community agency alignment. So With this one, we're talking about having procedures, having processes, or just systems in place to ensure that all external community agency work is aligned to the PBIS framework. And not only just to the framework, but also to our evidence-based practices and our organizational goals. We have community agency partners. Lots of districts are really blessed to have a wealth of resources outside the walls of the school. Mental health providers or clinicians, lots of different people that can come in and provide supports. What we're looking for in this item is to say, that's fantastic. Let's work smarter, not harder. And so with this item, the main idea is that to create collaborative and efficient working structures, we've established processes to ensure that that external, that community agency work truly is aligned with the goals of the district, our evidence-based practices that we're using with PBIS, and our PBS framework at large. We don't want to replicate work. We don't want to have a community agency partner come in doing good work that is counterproductive to the work that we're doing all day, every day with our student population, or we don't work that negates what we're doing. And so we really want to make sure that there is that level of alignment. And it's our responsibility as the district leadership team to make sure that A, we check on these things, and B, with our community partners, we orient them to what's happening in our district. They can't be in alignment with us if we haven't first shown them what we're doing and what we're about. And so one of my colleagues had an example, things as simple as just language, our language alignment. If we're in our district talking about, we are safe, respectful, responsible, we want to make sure that we share that language with our community partners who are coming in to provide services, because we want them to use that same language too. That's how we create more efficient, more effective systems. And lots of times we have people that come in, they're doing good work, but we're not paying attention to what they're doing. So we actually don't know the work that's being done in our own district or how kids are being helped. And we have a district outside St. Louis in one of our metro districts. They had 7 sites, 82 different partners, 82 different community agency or external partners serving 7 schools. So they had to take a step back. They did an audit, and they also did an overview for all of their partners. And, if you're going to come in, we want you to come in. We want you to be a partner, but we're going to first orient you to what we are about. And by the time that they did that, they were able to transition from 82 partners to 36 partners. So they have a better read on what's being done, and they know that the work that is being done is in alignment with their overarching goals as a district. So some quick checks that you could use with your team would be to think about, do we even have a list? Oftentimes there isn't a list. We know we have people coming in, but we've never stopped to really think about who's coming in and for what purposes. We want to make sure that we also check and see, if you're coming in, do you know what we're about? Do you know we're a PBIS district and what we're doing and what our language is and how we talk about things? And then we also want to make sure that the work that our partners are doing is complementary to the work that we're doing all day, every day. And so thinking about, if there is a service that's being provided, how is it in alignment with the evidence-based practices that we're just going to do with our students by being a PBIS district? So to be fully implemented, we'd be looking for something that is documented, some written procedures that are available and known and consistently used to embed or align that external work with what's happening in the district, especially with our framework and our goals. So keeping that theme of alignment, we want our community agency partners to be aligned with the work we're doing, their work with our work. We also want to think about our alignment to district outcomes. Districts have mission, visions, and goals. They know where they want to be, and oftentimes they are long range. One of the examples that I think I'm going to show you today, they've got goals projected all the way out into the decade for 2030. So these are long range goals because we know it takes time in a district to achieve these goals. So when we think about 3.3, we're talking about our academic and our social emotional behavioral frameworks are aligned with the key district outcomes or improvement goals. That how we do our work does match up with where we say we want to go. So the main idea, we've got documentation. We can look at it. We can find it easily. That really does show that level of alignment, that if this is our goal and this is our framework, these two things work together. So for a team, they might think about, has our district even articulated what our district improvement goals are, or our outcomes that we're shooting for? Oftentimes districts do, but oftentimes we don't know what they are. There's a lot of goals, or we don't see how they map back to the work that's being done, or there was a subcommittee or a board of education that crafted the goals. We don't really know where they are. We want to know where they are. We want to know what they say. And we also want to be able to look and see where are those points of alignment between what we're doing with our academic and or our social emotional behavioral frameworks and what the goals of the districts are. Because to be fully implemented, we want that level of alignment. So let's take a look at what that might look like. So here's an example. This is Omaha Public Schools. So our team here at the University of Missouri has done some supporting work with Omaha Public Schools for several years now. And we just were shared from them their strategic plan of action that will take them over the next 5 years, 2020 to 2025. Now, one of their priorities is ethic of care. And so you can see there are two goals that are highlighted by the what. So the first what on the left is that each school and program in the district will demonstrate an annual increase in the percentage of students missing less than 9 days. So dealing with chronic absenteeism. So they're going to collect data. They're going to monitor that. That fits within a PBIS framework. Over on the right-hand side, that ethic of care goal that starts with what? We're looking at improved outcomes on the climate survey. Okay, school climate, that's PBIS framework right there. So we've got two things, two specific goals that we can map our social emotional behavioral work, our PBIS framework, right back to. Here's another example from them, that by June of 2025, proactive efforts focus on improving social emotional skills at each school or program in the district will decrease annually the number of disciplinary events. And so that one right there, that speaks right to this work that a district leadership team would be doing. So I wanted to share this example with you because it's a clear example of how they've worked to say, this is the point of connection. This is the level of alignment between either an academic framework, and they've got academic goals, I just didn't show them to you today, or our social emotional behavioral framework. And so there are three indicators right here in this strategic plan of action where we see those points of connection and alignment. So that brings us to a good checkpoint. Let's check in and see from budget to community agency alignment to goal alignment. What clarifications can I offer? What questions might you have? Feel free to also send them through the chat.
So, Kelsey, there was one question from Christina. Can you speak to the use of stakeholder involvement in various areas of the life of the school, not directly related to PBIS, when evaluating through the DSFI?
Can you repeat that question for me?
Sure. And Christina, if you're on here and you can unmute yourself, or maybe she's in the, oh, she's not. Can you speak to the use of stakeholder involvement in various areas of the life of a school, not directly related to PBIS, when evaluating through the DSFI?
So I'm going to go back to the item on stakeholder involvement. Okay, and so when we're using the DSFI, we've got a written process to engage stakeholders, families, community members. It's representative of our district's demographics and underserved populations. What I think I hear in the question is that, can I speak to this outside of the realm of PBIS? Tina, is that your interpretation of the question?
That's what I'm seeing too.
Okay.
I don't know if Christina, you want to elaborate in the chat, or wait, there's another. Yes, Christina's saying yes.
Okay, great. Yeah. So let's take a look. Here is that stakeholder engagement plan and process. I think you could insert any content in here, any program, or, let's take a step back and say, okay, PBS framework, we're really talking about social, emotional, behavioral, academics. Okay, I could have a stakeholder engagement plan for things that are more academic or scholastics. I still am going to end up, I feel, with something like this, where I am using that acronym of accomplishments, information, and data. I want to make sure I have a variety of methods to get information, accomplishments, and data out, regardless of what the topic is. With the DSFI, we really are talking about things that are mapped back to our PBS framework, or what we're doing related to social, emotional, behavior, school climate, etc. So I hope that helps answer the question. If not, put
Yeah,
something through the chat and let us know.
She said you got it.
Great. Becky, I see you posted through something in the chat. In your experience, have districts you worked with defined fundraising? Was individual school fundraising part of the district budget, or was it more central office focused? Great question. It's really been central office focused. And the reason being, with fundraising, it's beneficial. Don't get me wrong, it's helpful. Every little bit helps. However, we can't make long-term plans because fundraising is not as sustainable as a central office budget. And I know I'm laughing to myself when I say a central office budget is sustainable, because those ebb and flow too. But we do want to have something at the top, up at that executive level, where we have specifically earmarked, line item, budgeted this thing here. Because when we have it at that level, up at the top, we're more likely to get that money, to be able to come back and advocate for that money, demonstrate what that money went to and how it improved what we're happening in the district. And it moves, there's a little bit of budget that is political. And by having it at that central office level, we're leveraging the politics, if you will, in a really savvy way. So Becky, I hope that helps. If not, say that's not helpful.
She said, yeah. Anybody want to unmute themselves on the panel here and ask away? Rachel raised her hand. Let's see.
Hi, Rachel.
Let's see if I can unmute her. Allowed to talk. Look at that. Rachel.
Hello?
There you
Hi,
go.
Rachel.
Oh, Rachel Eisenberg?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I'm like, what?
That was a mistake. I'm sorry, but I am greatly enjoying the presentation.
See how responsive I am?
Thank you, Tina.
Rachel, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Kelsey.
We like to have fun here, you guys. So feel free to have fun along with us.
Ken has a question.
Yeah, thank you, Tina. The question I have is, in our district so far, we've been very, I guess, privileged or blessed to be able to secure some funding, to support PBIS in our district. I guess us really looking at revamping some of our student services planning and trying to really implement the strategic plan a little bit further, since it kind of got a little slowed down with the pandemic and everything. But my question to you would be, so what are some of the ways that you would suggest that we would present to our executive leadership? So what would we want to bring as facilitators? What could we present to our superintendent or assistant superintendent as the justification for the funding, and in particular, like what programming or what aspect of PBIS? Because I guess I asked that because currently, we've been very fortunate to receive some additional funding I can't remember the name of the grant that we secure through, off the top of my head, I'm sorry, but we usually support some of our schools with some funding for incentives and some other PD opportunities in that. So I just kind of would like to hear a little bit more of what you suggest, I know Dr. Morris, on how to present that to the executive level leadership and why to justify that to help support the framework.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that question, because what I hear in that is we understand the what. Let's talk about the how. How do I start to make this pivot from external short-term grant-related funding and really talk to the people at the top, at the executive level, to say, this is important. This is something where we need to make that longer-term investment. And so I think it's a couple things. You know, it is the information, the accomplishments, the data, just like we would consider any other stakeholder group for accomplishments, information, and data. We want to consider our executive level leaders too, because they need to understand what is this, what are the outcomes that we're getting by doing this work, how do those outcomes map back to the larger district goals and priorities and improvements, and then just, you know, the data that we're getting. And so that is a huge part of it too, just the making sure that they know what is going on. At the same time, we're getting ready to move into a whole series of features that are related to alignment of initiatives. And so I think it's also helping our district level leaders understand we're doing a lot of other things already. How do we make sure that all of these things are in a level of alignment? And so how do we maybe not create new funding sources, but just take a different look at the existing funding to see if we can work smarter, not harder. And so I know that that's kind of a hold on type approach to your question, but I think we're going to get into some content today that's going to give you good food for thought as well as good tools for that conversation. Is that helpful?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Give me a little bit of clarity and some ways to go about it. So I appreciate it.
For sure. I see Donna posted through the chat. Does only the district systems team develop the strategic plan of action, or is there an opportunity for the individual school teams to have input? Great question. Usually it's the district leadership team. It's the district leadership team that's completing the DSFI. So they have the greater level of fluency and familiarity with the items and how the items need to be addressed in order to move from, you know, not implemented to partially implemented to fully implemented. That being said, it would be a great idea to take that action plan and use that for stakeholder engagement, specifically your internal stakeholders. We don't want to just have an action plan that only the people around the table know about. That's not helpful long-term. The more that people know about the work being done, the more they can support the work being done. So I think it would absolutely make sense to develop the plan as a team, but then roll the plan out with some information dissemination and also give people the chance to provide input on that. And then the feedback being taken back to the team, and the team identifies based upon their level of fluency and familiarity, what should we do or how could we respond to some of this information? So I think using your internal stakeholder groups to get feedback is a great way. I see Nikki posted through the chat. Can you provide some examples of what the budget's used for? What do you think a reasonable budget to plan for is? It will depend upon the size of the district, just looking for ideas. We're at the very beginning stages. Fantastic. So Nikki, I'm going to go back to that example budget that I showed a few slides earlier, because it'll give some good ideas about what types of things could be on a budget. So these two things that are here right now on these line items. One, we've got budget set aside to send our people to the National Leadership Forum so that they can hear from other experts in the field, as well as other implementers across the country, and just start to learn what's being done. And so travel, hotel, registration, just anything that goes along with that conference, or the PaPBS conference. We want to make sure it looks here on this that we're sending schools teams there. And so conference-related travel would be something. You might also consider on a budget line item, having maybe a district coordinator or some FTE that's allocated back to somebody to coordinate the district leadership team and coordinate the work that's being done across the district. We also, and this was something that I think Ken just mentioned a few minutes ago in his question, he said that we've got startup funds, or we have funds that we give schools to kind of use at the school level. We would hope that within a budget line item for district-wide implementation, that we're planning for the funds that we give to a school to facilitate some of the work that's going to be done in the building. So that could be, at the tier 1 level. If we're going, what's our school-wide acknowledgement system? Okay, do we need funds that can go along with that? Or if we're going to host a PBS kickoff for parents, are there funds that that school can access for refreshments or whatever? So those types of things, the events or the day-to-day things that move the work forward, that's all helpful too with the funding. I see some other questions through the chat. I'll do the best that I can to answer those as we keep moving forward. Just taking a look at the time, I want to make sure that we do have enough of an opportunity to get into the back half of section 3. So we're going to pick up here with 3.4, which is alignment to initiatives. So with alignment to initiatives, we're understanding there's a lot that's happening in the district. We would love to say that it's only PBIS or only social emotional behavioral, but that's not the case. There's a lot going on. We want to make sure that there's a clear description of initiatives and specifically the alignment. We want to see, and oftentimes it's through a graphic organizer, something visual so that we can see it, that's going to display how other things that are happening that have similar goals, similar outcomes, systems or practices, things of a similar nature to PBIS. How are they integrated within our PBIS framework, or how are they collaborating with our PBIS framework? If we're going to say we're going to expand, we're going to scale up, we're going to do PBIS district-wide, we also have to understand there's a whole lot of other things that are happening, and we want these to be integrated and aligned. So we're going to look and see what is that level of alignment. The main idea being that we want to illustrate and have that documentation readily available to show how PBIS and these other things with similar goals, outcomes, systems, and practices relate, connect, and are aligned. Because if we don't do that, people don't really see what we're doing. They don't see the points of connection because we haven't identified them. And so then when it comes back to budget and we say, well, we can't pay for this because we're already doing that. Well, by having this level of alignment, we can see we don't need to adopt something new, or this thing that we're doing over here that we've called this other name, we're actually already doing it over here in PBIS. So we want to make sure that we have that level of alignment because it gives us the opportunity to work more efficiently and to work more effectively. And so a quick check for a team could be, do we even have documentation that says these are all the things that we're doing? Yes, we're doing PBIS, but we're also doing, lots of schools in Missouri. You've got character education. We've got Leader in Me. We have all these other things that we're doing that truthfully fit within a PBIS framework. We don't have to choose between the two, and we don't have to sacrifice effective implementation in one for the other, when really by looking at the alignment, we see where they fit within. So do we even have that documentation? Does the documentation say, okay, for this initiative, here are the goals of it. Here's the system that it uses. Here are the practices, because having that information helps us see where the points of connection and alignment are. Does the documentation articulate those points of connections or disconnections? And is it readily available to stakeholders? We want our people to be able to know what's happening in the district and not have to hunt for it or ask for it, to be able to get it easily. Specifically, our internal stakeholders, the people that are doing the work in buildings or across the district. So to be fully implemented, we want to have something that outlines, maybe it's a concept map, a list, a team chart, a graphic organizer to outline our existing related initiatives. Again, those things with similar goals, outcomes, practices, and systems. We want that alignment to be clearly documented and readily available to our relevant stakeholders. So a resource that you will have access to, and you can even, after we jump off the hall today, Google it, go to the Center on PBIS website and access it easily. But there's a technical guide for alignment that was produced from the Center on PBIS a few years ago. I want to say back in 2017, that talks about the alignment process. And then you can see there in that page on the right, kind of breaks down for you, how do we assess our current initiatives? Kind of gives you 6 things to think about to take stock of where are we doing? We know we're not only doing PBIS, but what else are we doing and how does it align and connect? So you've got that resource that you'll have access to. Because between now and when we come back again, I want you to really do that. Think about, enlist, identify, explore, what are the current social, emotional, behavioral initiatives, interventions, and programs? What are we doing? Because in order to do PBIS implementation well, from one building to the next, to scale it, to expand it, we really do need to see what are all the other things that we're doing and where do those fit in? Because it's not about doing more, it's about working smarter and making sure that we're not replicating or duplicating. So between now and when we come back together, see if you can generate a list of all the things that are being done. 3.5 is about adopting new things. And this oftentimes happens in a district. Somebody goes to a conference, or somebody reads an article, or somebody talks to somebody in another district. We get ideas, and ideas are great. Ideas move people forward. We want to have a process in place for what do we do and how do we respond when it's time to adopt an idea? How do we make that decision about adoption? And so what we're looking for in 3.5 is a written process that the district follows to review fit for anything that's new related to social, emotional, behavioral initiatives or practices. We want to review the fit and see what is the evidence base? What capacity will this take for us to implement this well before we decide to adopt it or integrate it? So the main idea being, we want a clear decision-making process, something that's documented and regularly followed to really see what are our social, emotional, behavioral needs across the district. Before we adopt something new, it needs to fill a vacancy we've already identified. If we've already got our bases covered, it's likely we don't need to adopt something new. But this process is also going to help us in making informed decisions about anything new coming in and what their likelihood of success could be given the context of the district. So the quick check a team could use would be working through what is our process? Do we even have it? Is it regularly used and followed? And is it communicated with building level leaders? Because oftentimes it's buildings that are looking to adopt new things or looking to do something different or get the ideas because one teacher talked to another or somebody went to a conference. So because this work's going to end up happening at the building level, we want them to know what it is and understand the process. So you can see, to be fully implemented, we would want to have that clear procedure for reviewing anything new to make an informed decision before we decide to adopt it. A tool that would be helpful, and this comes from the National Implementation Research Network, is their Hexagon tool for exploration, where it walks through what's our need, what's the evidence base, how would this fit, usability, capacity, and support, taking a good look at whatever that thing is that we're proposing for adoption and really analyzing it through these 6 lenses can really give a district leadership team the capacity to make an informed decision. So I'll make sure that you've got that as a resource too. So 3.6, options for tiered interventions. you remember way back at the beginning of our time together today, I pulled up the slide that had the pyramid on it. What we're doing at a district level is creating a district-wide multi-tier system of support. With this item, we're talking about what are our options for tiered intervention. So we want to have a formal district process in place to select and support evidence-based tier 2 and 3 interventions that are matched to student need, specifically behavioral function. What are we trying to get or avoid? And how does this intervention support whatever that function is? And then adapted to improve contextual fit. The reason this is important is we say this all the time, and my boss, Dr. Tim Lewis, said this anywhere and anytime he has the chance. No one owns tier 2. We don't want a building to feel as if they have to figure out everything under the sun, all the nuts and bolts about how to support students at advanced tiers. When you start moving into tiers 2 and 3, that requires more resources. It requires a different skill set. It requires new intervention, either of a targeted group nature, or really when you get up to tier 3 and individual student support systems, those are resource intensive. We don't want the onus to be on schools individually. As a district, we should say, okay, here are the things that we can use to select. So when we select, we're saying these are the interventions that we do at tier 2. At tier 2, we do check and connect for our high school students, our secondary school students. We do check and check out at all of our elementaries and into our middles and junior highs. Or maybe we also do check and check out at high school, but it's contextually appropriate. Or we do social skill groups. Whatever the targeted intervention is at tier 2 with an evidence base, we say, this is what we do. These are the things that we've selected. So these are the things that we will provide support for. So that means resources. That means professional development, training, technical assistance, coaching. If you're going to implement check in, check out at your building, you don't have to figure everything about it. We will help you with that because that's how we create a sustainable district multi-tier system of support. So the main idea being the district uses an established decision-making process. They're making informed decisions to identify what are we going to do at tiers 2 and 3. And then those are the things the district promotes. Those are the things that they provide support for. So I'm working with the district right now where they're doing this item. They're saying, okay, we've got a lot of things that are happening at the advanced tiers for students that are not responding to tier 1. We're going to establish a district-wide support structure for check in, check out. So we're going to promote check in, check out because it's evidence-based. We're going to make sure that schools get supports they need to implement check in, check out with Fidelity. We're also going to do that with social skills groups. We're also going to do that with check and connect for them at the high school level. They've decided this is what we're going to do. Now, that means, and what they've shared with their buildings, if you want to do something else, that's on you. We're not going to provide the training and coaching for whatever that other thing is, because we've identified that these things align with our mission, vision, goals. These things align with where we're headed, with our improvements and our priorities. These are the things that we will support. So it's establishing, this is what we're doing and this is how we can help you. So with the quick check, we want to have that formal process in place to identify. So we think about, we even have documentation which outlines what it is that we support. Does the district have a process to identify, what interventions are available? What interventions match the needs of our students? Is it mapped back to behavioral function to make sure that students are getting their needs met? And is this decision-making process not only used regularly, but also communicated with building level leaders? Have we moved down to that level of implementation at the school to make sure that people know this is what's available for you? This is how we can support you in this process. And then with that, does the district process outline support components? So for anything that's going to happen at tier 2 or 3 that the district's going to support, have we talked about, here's the professional development that will be made available. Here's the budget that you'll have if you need startup funds to do this intervention, et cetera. or here's the data that we can help you collect to evaluate the effects as well as the fidelity of implementation. Have we thought about those things in order to get to this place of having a formal district process? So this is what we've created from our team here at the MU Center for School-Wide PBS, but it's an intervention map where we're thinking across all of our tiers, even tier 1, what are we doing? What's the expected outcome or need that we're meeting? Who's facilitating it? What are the data decision rules? How many students participated? How many made progress? Was the intervention an evidence-based practice? And is the intervention being implemented with fidelity? This information helps that district leadership team establish this process, but also audit this process from one year to the next. And that moves us to a content checkpoint. So we've talked about alignment, really working to make sure that we've got our interventions aligned. We know what it is that we're promoting and supporting. And so we're going to open the lines up again, whether it's the chat lines, or feel free to raise your hand. And I believe Tina can help unmute you. So that way you can ask that question, we can interact. And while we open up those lines, I see a carryover question in the chat from Christy when we had our last content checkpoint. So Christy said, when looking at PBIS from a district level, as opposed to an individual school level, how important is it to keep the funding district rather than school-based? We often have schools put in a line item at the building level, but this can then cause inequities within the district. You're absolutely right. We can cause inequities within the district. We have some buildings that have lots of money to do this work and are doing good work because they have the resources to support themselves. And we have some buildings that they are running on fumes and they're hustling and trying to do the best for their kids. So because it does create that level of inequity, we do want to have a budget line item at the district, not only for the district leadership team or just things that are of a district organizational systems level nature, but we do want to have line items for buildings. We want to be able to provide funds to buildings, and we want that to be equitable. And so I answer to your question, Christy, where you say, how important is it to keep it at the district level rather than at the school level? I'm going to say it's a yes and. Yes, it's important that the funding be up at the district level, and it's important that within that funding, we've allocated for our different buildings. So I hope that's helpful, Christy. And if I interpreted the question other than how you intended, please let me know, and let's make sure that we move from fuzzy to clear.
Kelsey, I remember back in the day when we did sets, we used to require a line item in a building budget. And the premise behind that was, unless there's a line item, it doesn't show that the building values it, you know, it, like you were saying at the beginning, catch as catch can, you know. So I see what you're saying at the district level. There was a question that Lisa realized she only posed to me, but it's, so do district buildings ever have, do buildings in the district ever have different tier 2, tier 3 systems, even knowing that they're evidence-based, but could they have their own tier 2, tier 3 interventions?
Yes. And the way that it was kind of, I had to process that question. We talk a lot in districts about what are we tight about and what are we loose about. There's some things that we're all going to do. We're all going to use data to make decisions. From my campus to your campus, our data decision rules may look different, and that's okay. But we're all going to use data to make decisions. We're all going to keep our fingers on the pulse of what's going on by monitoring both fidelity of implementation and student outcomes. How you go about doing that on your campus may look different than how I go about doing it on my campus. You may choose to do another district-supported intervention than I do, okay? But when we get to the place of wanting to do something that isn't on our district intervention map, or the district has said, we've identified these, here's the menu of district choices. If you want to do something that's not on that menu, that it will be your responsibility to figure out to support it, and then to support your use of it. Because if we're going to do something that doesn't get the outcomes that we're shooting for or doesn't work in alignment with the overall PBS framework, then that's a topic of conversation. So Lisa, I know that you posed that question to Tina. If there's more that we can speak to regarding that, please feel free to let us know. And
No, that makes sense. I just was wondering, you might have one building that wants to do check-in, check-out at tier 2, and another building that's doing social skills and instructional grouping. So as long as they're on some menu or acceptable evidence-based interventions, you're saying that it's okay if it looks different in different buildings because different buildings are made up differently.
Yeah, the context is different. So yeah, what you just described, I'm doing check-in, check-out, you're doing small social skills groups, fantastic. The district has said we support both of these. So that way, when I need my people to be trained on check-in, check-out, I don't have to figure it out myself. And I know, and the district knows that we're doing an evidence-based intervention to meet a specific need. Likewise for your building, different intervention, different need, both are okay. Other questions? Can you discuss the process on how a district would go about creating and implementing their intervention map? Sure, absolutely. I think that's going to really tie back into your homework, your takeaway between now and when we meet again. And I'm going to backtrack to this lovely map here. And there we go. Okay. I think the process to create us, so let's look at that question in two parts. The creation of that, take something like this, and just identify. And it starts with just the identification, the listing. What are we doing? What are we doing at tier 1? What are we doing at tier 2? What are we doing at tier 3? So kind of working that first column. Moving into the second column, what function does this meet? Because if it doesn't meet a function, get or avoid and any derivation of that, we want to flag that. We want to circle that because we have to take a really hard look at continuing to implement things that aren't designed to meet a specific student need. And then we kind of keep moving across that way. And specifically looking, how many kids did we have in this intervention last year? And how many made progress? If we're doing an intervention that wasn't designed to meet a specific need and we're not getting good outcomes, we're going to flag that, okay? I don't know that we need to continue to implement this one in particular. And then working all the way to the right end of those columns, is it an evidence-based practice? If it's not, that's a big red flag. And then is it being implemented with fidelity? So I would start by just assessing, identifying, listing, kind of that basic level of what are we even doing? And then that's going to create the conversation for revising this map on a regular basis, kind of bringing into life the rich conversation about working smarter, not harder, making sure student needs are getting met, and making sure that things that we're doing are evidence-based practice so that way we can truly support them at a high level within the district. All right, we've got two final items and then we'll talk about resources and takeaways. So 3.7 is an annual alignment review. In Ken's question, I talked about looking at things on a regular basis, kind of auditing. That's right here, an annual alignment review. That there's a periodic formal review, maybe it's a survey, a resource, specific mapping process of existing social, emotional, behavioral initiatives or programs to determine their effectiveness, their relevance, and fidelity of implementation. We want to make sure that we're actually checking on the things that we're doing to make sure that they're getting the outcomes that we're hoping for and that we're doing them the way that we said we would or that they were designed to be done. So the main idea here is that in order to impact and sustain positive change, we really have to look in the mirror on a regular basis. It's no different than to the beginning of the year, everybody comes up with a new a health resolution. I'm going to lose 5 pounds. I'm going to be able to do 25 push-ups, etc. That doesn't happen overnight. I don't get off the couch and run a marathon. There are things that I have to do to get up to that. And I need to check my progress along the way. And same thing here. We want to check in on our progress, check in on our fidelity of implementation, our outcomes. Are these things still suitable for our context? Are they still a fit? Are they still productive? And if we say yes, okay, that's one conversation. If we say no, it's another conversation. But we have to have the conversation. We have to have that annual review of what it is that we're doing and how they align to who we say we are and what we do. So in order to be fully implemented, we would want to have social, emotional, behavioral related initiatives reviewed periodically at both the level for fidelity of implementation and effectiveness. So we want to look and see the adults and the kids. And so for the team, they could think about, when was the last time this was done? Is there a standard timeline? Do we know that we do this every 12 months or every 6 months? Or, who is doing this? So lots of questions to unearth what's being done and how often is it done? And then does the review process include an analysis of cost effectiveness? If we're going to continue to invest in this, whether it's investing people, investing time, investing money, are we seeing positive change? And so we want to be able to take a look at that. One of the resources that you'll have access to is the Interconnected Systems Framework District Leadership Installation Guide. And so they, within this, have embedded some really savvy guiding questions that can facilitate this conversation at a district level as you're working to make sure that the things that you're doing are checked in on and audited for that regular alignment. So you'll have this resource to use. Which brings us to our final item for budget and funding and alignment. It's our operations for tiered intervention. So earlier we talked about options. I've got options on what I do to create a district-wide continuum from the bottom to the top. I've got options. Here at 3.8, we're talking about the operations. I've identified earlier the what. What am I going to do? I'm going to do check in, check out. I'm going to do social skills groups. I'm going to do whatever. Okay. Here we're talking about the operations. How do we actually pull those things off? Well, it's talking here about funding and organizational resources. I got to have the resources to support this work, and that I continue to make sure that they're aligned to sustain implementation. So the big idea here is that the funding, human and organizational resources that are necessary to operate a district-wide multi-tier system of support are checked often, checked regularly for continued alignment, their effectiveness, their efficiency, and the sustainability. So we want to make sure that we're looking at things like FTE, we're looking at time, we're looking at the professional development that we are offering or could offer. Because when I say that I'm going to provide funding for something like trauma-informed care, I should be able not only to see how that fits within our larger overall framework, so I'm checking on that alignment, but I'm also making sure that we have said we're going to support, promote, advocate, back, champion, whatever the verb is that you want to put there at the advanced tiers. So if we're saying we're going to do these things, we've got to make sure that I've got the capacity, and you can read capacity in a lot of different ways, to actually pull them off and support them. So here's a quick check. And with this quick check, it's tied back to several other items in this strand. So you could look at 3.1, you could look at 3.4, you could look at 3.7. Because my colleague, Dr. Tricia Guffey, says this is the bow on this section. This is the one that binds them all. Up to this point, we've talked about related programs, related initiatives, having a level of alignment with the interventions that we offer. Okay, we've identified the what. This item is really addressing the how. How are we going to pull these things off to make sure that they are implemented in a sustainable way. So we're checking on the funding and organizational resources, making sure that we've got what we need to sustain the work. And we're going to close out. I know it just ticked to 1:30. So let's take, if we can, Tina, just like 2 or 3 more minutes, and we'll close out by talking about resources and next steps. Do we have enough time to do that?
Yeah, let's do that. And I'm putting in the chat the link for the National Center, the evaluation they need, so people can, if they have to go, fill that out for us.
Okay. So if you have any questions, feel free to post them through the chat. We'll make sure that they get answered. I see some links coming through right now from Tina. As well, feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you so you can ask that question directly and we can engage with each other. While those are coming through, just to be respectful of our time, in terms of resources, I'm going to make sure that I prepare a document and share with Tina all the resources that we highlighted today. So I highlighted a stakeholder engagement plan template or an example district budget or anything that you see on this screen here. I'll make sure that there's a one-stop shop so that way, as you continue to do this work, you've got things that you can draw from. In addition to those, I think I've shared with you last time, the DSFI. We also authored a targeted brief just about doing this work at the district level, something if you are continuing to form your team, it's a great takeaway for those prospective team members to better understand what are we doing here. And then there are 2 chapters from our district leadership team practice guide that we've authored here at the University of Missouri. We authored a large practice guide with chapters devoted to each of the DSFI sections. So I'll make sure that you've got access to chapter 2, which is all about stakeholder engagement, and chapter 3 about funding and alignment, because it's going to cover the things we talked about today, but it's also going to take your learning deeper. So you can really start to think about, if I was going to do an action plan, what might be some of the things that I considered. In terms of next steps, what's coming up next? We'll come back together Thursday, February the 25th. We'll pick back up at our standard time of 1 o'clock, and we'll talk about policy and workforce capacity. Between now and then, here's some things that I think could benefit you and benefit your district's journey. First, stakeholder engagement. Examine your current stakeholder engagement processes, and you can even use content from items 2.1 and 2.2 to evaluate what are we doing now, your current reality, and brainstorm recommendations. What could we start to do? Or maybe what do we need to think about moving into the 2021-2022 school year? For funding and alignment, identify your current funding source. Is it external? Is it internal? Go back to item 3.1 for more information. List all current social, emotional, behavioral initiatives, interventions, and programs. Really start to get a list of what are we doing, so we can start to look at how do these things align with our PBIS implementation. So you can go back to 3.4. The advanced move would be to arrange a spreadsheet listing the current money supporting PBIS and the current money supporting those other related initiatives. That would kind of be the advanced move. But those are great steps for you to take as you continue on this journey. So with that, I'm going to say thank you so much. I always look forward to these. It's exciting. I love talking about this stuff. It's exciting to be here with you guys. And so if there are any other questions or answers, please feel free to put them through the chat. I'm excited to see you all in February. And with that, Tina, I'll turn it back over